Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tracey Kent from the University of Birmingham. And I've just realised that on my first slide I haven't said who I am. Obviously I wasn't sure who I was this morning. What I'm talking to you about this afternoon, very briefly, is the introduction at the University of Birmingham of the request a copy button within the ePrint software for our doctoral dissertations. We mandated doctoral dissertations back in September 2009, with the first cohort being December 2009. And so we've just been able to analyse 2 years' worth of data to see what effect the request a copy button has had on our service. We're very aware that because it's a mandate, we actually, unlike at Leicester, where it seems to be 78% mandate, we actually get 99.9% mandate. There's one thesis that I couldn't find that stopped it being 100%, because they have to submit an electronic copy to update their student record before they can get on that graduation list. So there's a real incentive to them to get that thesis to us. Now the mandate is actually that they will supply to us an electronic copy, and whether it's going to be embargoed in full text for both print and electronic, it doesn't matter. They have to supply us with a full text electronic copy, and that goes into our archive. What we then do is we then give the students a choice as to what to do with that electronic copy. And this is where we perhaps start to differ a little bit from some institutions about giving students choice. Now we all know how students love to have choices. It takes them a while to determine which option they want, and we encourage them, and it's quite useful for us to set up a dialogue with us if they're not sure. Because on the one hand we have their electronic copy that we can archive, so that preservation archiving function is being fulfilled. This is, if you like, the next step about trying to address the access and discovery problems for theses. You'll see from my opening slide that I said that it's gone from 2,500 theses to 250,000 theses in the year. 5 or 6 years ago, that's what we were supplying. We were supplying just over 2,500 theses a year, roughly a couple a week, and those would be a whole range of different years, different subjects. Now, through this service, we're fulfilling around 2,500 requests a year, which is a huge development for us, and one that we are still struggling to cope with at times. So the students come along and we enter this dialogue with them about what they want to do with their electronic copy. Now on the form that they complete, that they have to sign to say they've understood it, which also takes some time sometimes to get them to actually sign the form and to actually choose an option, we get so many of these forms returned where they haven't ticked anything. We have to go back to them and say, please tell us what you want to do. Because at Birmingham, as I'm sure same with a lot of institutions, the copyright resides with the author, so we can't tell them what to do. We recommend, and the option we recommend is full open access. So they submit their thesis to us, and if they've chosen option A, then we go through the thesis, ensure that there is no copyrighted material in there, ensure that there's no sensitive or commercially sensitive data in there, and work with the students to either release the full text, if that's appropriate, or to release a redacted version. And we try to release as full a copy as possible in order to fulfil kind of the open access mandate. Students can also choose to go for option B, which says, I'm happy for somebody to have a copy, but they've got to request it. And to request it, they would come through the request a copy button. So we would put a request a copy button, that request comes through to the library, and we would then supply it on request. But as part of that process, we keep copies of where that request has come from and confirmation that it is for research, that it's not for commercial purposes, that it's for private study or research. And 18 months, 2 years I've been doing this, I've never had anybody say that it's for commercial purposes. I'd love one to come through, but none yet have come through to us. Now, whether that's because they wouldn't necessarily be honest, I don't know, but certainly they're not saying that it's for commercial purposes. If it was for commercial purposes, then even if it was option B, we would send the request back to the author for them to determine whether they wanted to go down that line. If it's option B, we would make it available to Ethos if it was requested. If it was harvested through Ethos, then we would make it available, because we're confident that the user is saying they're happy for that option, for their thesis to be made available, because they've chosen option B. They just want to put an extra step in the way to ensure that somebody really does want this. Now, some would say that that's not true open access, but as far as we're concerned, it means that our theses are getting out there. And we'll look at some statistics in just a moment. Option C is where, in the main, the researcher is going on to write up their work. Perhaps they've got a part of a contract that says that they've got to apply for particular types of information. In that case, we would put a request a copy button on as well, but when the requests come through, then we would go back to the author and say, we've had this request, would you like to fulfill this request? And we tell them what options they have available. And we suggest that they have two options. They can make the full text available because they identify the author, they identify the requester, or they're quite happy for their thesis to actually be made available on open access, or that they will allow us to supply 5% and really replicating the printed environment for how we would make our thesis available, i.e. 5% of one chapter of that thesis. The authors can also say, and a lot of them do, happy for 5% to be made available electronically, but not chapters 4, 5 and 7, or not the references, or not this, or not that. So we keep a note of that and then supply accordingly. If they go for option C, then they're not on Ethos. That doesn't mean to say that Ethos don't get requests for them, because the full text is not available in our repository, but the metadata is. And so we found, and I'll show you some statistics in a second, that in fact these are being requested through Ethos, but are not able to be supplied because the full text has been embargoed. A, Bs and Cs are all available in paper copy in the library. We still run a belt and braces approach. So despite the fact that some authors may say, I don't want chapter 4 to be released in the electronic environment, they can still, if the user is able to, can come into the library and view the paper copy. And one of the almost the downsides of this is that we thought that by putting more and more material available electronically, that the number of people coming into the library to request our paper theses would drop dramatically. And in fact, that's not the case. In fact, they've probably gone up. Now, whether that's because they're finding other material, or whether they're finding that this is too restrictive and they're not getting the full text, that's a research project that maybe GIST will fund at a future time. And then we've got the completely embargoed theses, whereby that would apply to both the paper copy and the electronic copy. And that means that there is no full text available in the repository, and often there's a redacted abstract available as well. So we did a little bit of analysis as to what this has meant in over the past 2 years. This is from December 2009 was our first cohort, but it's kind of January 2011, 2010. Yeah, December 2009, from January 2010 to December 2011. And what we've got here are the years, as you can see. We have obviously in the July congregations, we tend to get the bigger numbers sometimes, and we can see that if we take the A's and B's together, then that's about 88% of the doctoral theses awarded by Birmingham being on open access. and a lower proportion of theses that are not available in full text electronically, but in the main these are also available in paper copy as well. This is the request a copy button. When they select it, they're asked to give some details, some mandated information. So they have to give us an email address, they have to give us their name, whether it's Mickey Mouse or any other name. That's what we ask them for, and we ask them to tell us their contact details. And what helps, although it's not a mandated field, is the reason for the request, particularly for those that are option C's, that we're having to go to the author and say, would you like to supply the full text to this requester? Then obviously the more information we have here, the more useful it is to the researcher to identify whether they want to fulfill that request. This will then automatically generate an email back to the requester saying, are you happy for your details to be forwarded to the author? Are you happy to agree to certain terms and conditions? When they write back and say yes, then we forward the request to the author, or if it's an option B, fulfill it from our repository. So as a result of this, I'm not sure whether we've become a mini ethos or not, we've taken just over 400 requests since January 2010. Translates to about 8 a week, or 18 a week as I originally put, but 8 a week. And you know, a third of them are for option Bs, where we can easily fulfill them. Climbs up, okay? Okay, very much. Finish your slide. Let me do this then. What we found is that when we looked at the ethos statistics that ethos supplied to us, that we are fairly comparable to ethos in that we are being asked for these sorts of numbers for the B's and C's, and ethos are equally being asked for B's and C's from our repository. So it means that the people out there are coming to us from different ways, from ethos and direct to the repository. And the number of requests that we've received and the number of unique titles are very comparable to the ethos service when we're looking at the very current years of our electronic theses. Okay?